So when they get here, I can tell you right now, it's just going to be a delight. It's just
because when you get explained to you how you can't do it, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, actually.
Recording in progress.
Well, thank you for joining us at this August 21st meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments. Can we call this meeting to order, and can we get a roll call?
Chair Johnson,
Here.
Supervisor Madrone,
Present.
Councilmember Napier,
Here.
Mayor Burgell,
Here.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen, Mayor Pro Tem Kenny, Councilmember Orr,
Here.
Pack Member Arroyo, Pack Member Allstrand.
Here.
Well, thank you. And at this time, our first order of business is to adjourn as the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And our first item is for public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any public comment on items that are not on the agenda? I see none. So we can move on to our presentations. We have 3 today. And the first one being the Housing and Community Development Regional Housing Needs Determination with the Housing and Community Development Department of California.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. And just before we pass it over to our HCD team, who we're thankful are here this evening at the request of the board, if you recall from our last board meeting, they will be presenting some of the items from our recently received Regional Housing Needs Determination. So with that, I will kick it over to Taylor and team to provide the presentation.
Thank you.
Hello, board members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Marissa Prossi, and I am the Fair Housing Section Chief with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, where I lead our Fair Housing team and our RENA team. So I'm joined today by Kevin Rolfness and Taylor Price, specialists on the RENA team. So we really greatly appreciate the opportunity to present to the Humboldt County Association of Governments on your 7th cycle Regional Housing Needs Determination and to walk through its component parts. And we've allocated time at the end of the presentation for questions. So I will now hand it over to my colleague Taylor, who will walk through that overview. Thank you.
Today's presentation will first review the regional housing allocation process. Subsequently, we will review the data sources and the RENA determination, discuss statutory and administrative changes to the RENA determination since HCOG's 6th cycle RENA, review some of the important 7th cycle adjustments to HCOG's determination number, and we will end with next steps and time for questions. The RENA process refers to the first 2 steps, determination and allocation, of the multiple step process that California local jurisdictions use to plan for housing. The regional housing need determination is the determination that accounts for both existing and projected housing needs. This is the big housing number needed for each region. The regional housing needs allocation is where the Council of Governments, or HCD, distributes the region's housing determination to local jurisdictions in the region. This is how the big housing need number gets distributed to the cities and counties in the region. RENA is a quantification of housing needs for a region at all income levels based on population growth projections and other factors. A planning requirement implemented by local governments, updating the housing elements of their general plan. RENA is not a prediction of building permit, construction, or housing activity, a ceiling of potential housing market demand or production, limited due to existing land use capacity, such as rezoning, and other things that are necessary to accommodate RENA. The RENA process has been around since the 1970s and has required that cities and counties plan for the housing needs for all Californians. RENA has always been rooted in fair housing, and its focus has been on reducing concentrations of poverty and segregation through planning. However, there have been significant improvements in recent years that have increased the effectiveness of the RENA process. Identifying and addressing the statewide housing need is a multi-layered process that occurs over many years. First, the HCD RENA team calculates the housing need determination, the number of new housing units a region is projected to need over a period of years, with each period referred to as a cycle. In the determination phase, HCD, in consultation with the Department of Finance's Demographic Research Unit and the Regional Council of Governments, develops the regional housing need determination for the region using a variety of data factors at least 2 years before the housing element due date. Next is the allocation, or how the COG or HCD for rural regions without a COG distributes a portion of the determination to each jurisdiction. Once jurisdictions receive their allocation, each jurisdiction updates their housing element, showing how they can accommodate their allocation. COGs must develop a methodology that allocates the housing need among all local governments at least 1 year before the housing element due date. The COGS methodology must be developed in consultation with HCD, and HCD reviews the methodology to ensure it furthers the 5 statutory objectives of RENA. Once jurisdictions get their allocation, they use those numbers to update their housing element to demonstrate the housing need can be accommodated. Housing elements must identify and zone adequate housing sites to accommodate their share of RENA over the duration of the housing element planning period, and must include programs to encourage and facilitate housing development and remove or mitigate development constraints. Then each year, jurisdictions report annually on their housing element progress through their annual housing report. In calculating the determination, HCD and the Council of Governments meet and consult regarding the following data factors. These are described in Government Code Section 65584.01. Data sources for these factors generally come from the Demographic Research Unit at the CA Department of Finance, the COG, and the U.S. Census American Community Survey, California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Caltrans. For the sake of time, I won't read all the data factors off, but you can see them on the screen. There were significant discussions between HCD and HCOG and the Department of Finance to ensure that the population and household data accurately represented what is occurring in the region. Once data on those aforementioned factors are gathered, the regional housing need can be calculated. To illustrate the calculation, in partnership with the Department of Finance, HCD starts with the population projected to live in the region at the end of the cycle, and subtract those living in group quarters, think them things like military barracks, dormitories, and prisons. HCD then converts the projected household population to projected households using household formation rate data for the region. HCD applies adjustments to include factors related to vacancy rates, overcrowding, cost burden, average housing unit replacement, seasonal, recreational, and occasional use homes, the relationship between jobs and housing, homelessness, units lost during a state of emergency. The manner in which the adjustments are calculated varies somewhat based on the factors. Typically, we compare data for the region against the national average and apply an adjustment based on how it compares to the national average. We then subtract the number of occupied units at the start of the projection period, and that gives us the total housing need determination. We then distribute the total number across income categories. What was 4 categories in the 6th cycle is now 6 categories in the 7th cycle. And these are acutely low, extremely low, very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income, as defined by a percentage of the region's median income. There have been a number of new updates to the RHND methodology since HCOG's 6th cycle regional housing need determination was issued. When HCOG's 6th cycle RENA was issued, there were 3 adjustments: the vacancy adjustment, overcrowding adjustment, and replacement adjustment. HCOG is oftentimes early in the RENA cycle, and in the sixth cycle, there were significant changes to state law and the determination methodology that went into effect after HCOG's sixth cycle determination was issued. These included the addition of cost burden adjustment and the state of emergency adjustment. Since the conclusion of the sixth cycle, there have been additional updates to the determination methodology that have been added by statute or through HCD's existing administrative authority. These updates reflect demographic and data best practices as informed by extensive expert and stakeholder engagement to more accurately reflect true housing need. The updated RHND methodology includes adjustments to account for long-term permanent housing needs of people experiencing homelessness, to achieve a jobs housing balance, to reflect differences in healthy vacancy rates by tenure, and others. Due to the timing of Humboldt region's RENA, early in the cycle, the region missed out on some of the most significant sixth cycle adjustments. So this region is essentially experiencing 2 RENA cycles worth of updates at once. However, these changes are essential to make sure that each region of the state is planning for the best estimate of true housing need. This is Humboldt County Association of Governments' sixth cycle regional housing need determination, broken down by the 6 income categories, which are prescribed by California Health and Safety Code, sections 50063.5 ex sequentia. This is the Humboldt's regional housing need determination for the existing and projected housing needs for the 7th cycle. This includes the projected and existing population adjustments. In subsequent slides, we will be reviewing in more detail the adjustments which accounted for the majority of HCOG's 7th cycle RHND, which are adjustments 5, the owner or renter vacancy adjustments, adjustment 6, the overcrowding adjustment, adjustment 7, the cost burden adjustment, adjustment 8, the adjustment to account for households that experience both overcrowding and cost burden, and adjustment 12, the homelessness adjustment. I will now hand the presentation over to Kevin to walk through these adjustments.
Hey, can you hear me? It almost struck. Okay, all right. Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, as Taylor said, I'm going to walk you through. We'll take a more detailed look at the adjustments that were the driving force behind your determination. Vacancy rate, overcrowding, cost burden, homelessness. For example, we won't talk about the 2 jobs housing factors since they didn't adjust your determination in any way. So here's the vacancy rate adjustment, which was split out. It was a combined vacancy rate, healthy rate of 5% for both owner and renter. That was split out. So the vacancy adjustment is intended to ensure that the region's vacancy rate more closely resembles the vacancy rate of a healthy housing market. And the vacancy rate for a healthy housing market was chosen after extensive research and stakeholder outreach as part of California's Housing Future 2040 report. That was kind of considered RENA reform between the 6th and 7th cycles. And it was determined that a healthy ownership vacancy rate for ownership units or homes was 2%, and a healthy renter vacancy rate in rural areas was 6%, and then 7% in more urbanized areas with more volatile markets. Here we're looking at the owner vacancy rate adjustment. So overall, it's 1,231 units. The owner vacancy rate adjustment was 324 of those units. And so basically what we're doing here is we're looking at the difference between that 2% healthy rate and then the counties, the region, the vacancy rate, and then applying that difference to the projected households. And then, we'll look at the renter. We can provide additional detail if you'd like, but next slide. Renter. So that was 907 of the units. So now here we're looking at what's the difference between that 6%. We have the rural rate for your region. Comparing that 6% to your actual vacancy rate for rental units, which was 2.4 units. So that there's a bigger difference there and thus a bigger adjustment when we apply that to projected households. And then you can also see the government citation for these. These are all based in statute and adjustments we got to make, but also with some good reasoning behind them. Next, please. Now we have cost burden and overcrowding adjustments that combine to about 3,600 units. The reason behind that, cost burden and overcrowded households reflect the extent to which households, particularly lower income households, are impacted by a tight housing market. High rates of cost burden households suggest there's insufficient supply of affordable housing units, leading to households spending a greater share of their income, 30% or more to be exact, on housing costs. And then high overcrowding rates indicate folks are sharing rooms to alleviate costs. The overcrowding adjustment compares the regional overcrowding rate to the national average, then applies that difference to existing households. Humboldt had an elevated overcrowding rate compared to the national rate of 3.4%, had a rate of 4.1. The cost burden adjustment compares the regional cost burden rate to the national average, then applies that difference to existing households. Kind of similar thing as overcrowding, and Humboldt's cost burden rate exceeded the national rate of, which was roughly 32%, is about a 10% difference. And then, you can see the statutory references there as well. That's not the end of the cost burden overcrowding adjustment. So many households that are experience overcrowding are also cost burden. So to ensure that those households are not double counted in these adjustments, we worked with the Department of Finance they provided some data on kind of a count of how many households are experiencing both. And so this is a downward adjustment of 349 units. This adjustment's basically capped. It can't be any larger than either one of the adjustments. So in essence, it canceled out the overcrowding adjustment. And so those 349 units and then 349 those take. But that's the reasoning there is to consider those that might be both cost burden and overcrowding. And lastly, we have the homelessness adjustment, which was added last year as part of AB 3093. The homelessness adjustment is intended to ensure that the housing needs of individuals and families experiencing homelessness are adequately addressed in this RHNA determination process. And to ensure that these individuals and families are accounted for, we used HUD, point-in-time counts, PIT counts, the 2024 PIT count data. And then what we do is, it's not just you have X number of homeless, it's a one for one. We take that PIT count of the individuals and we actually multiply it by age group, by our household formation rates that are kind of the underlying a component of our population projections. So and then that gives you a unit count. So next slide, please, Taylor. So here are the specific numbers. These are those numbers taken straight from the HUD data. And so there was 1,573 folks experiencing homelessness counted in 2024. And once the math is done and we multiply by household formation rates, that ends up being a 769 unit adjustment. So that's kind of the math going on there. And I think that's it. We wanted to leave time for more questions. But next steps, so y'all will begin working on your RHNA allocation methodology. I believe you'll be releasing it to your jurisdictions, releasing it publicly, maybe getting some feedback, and then bringing it back to this body. We like to consult. We're going to be available to, if you want to send anything our way, we help review. We can provide some feedback ahead of time before it's not just send us a final draft and we'll look at it and do our analysis and approval. And then you'll adopt that final plan, and then of course this all ends up going to the local governments end up addressing their RHNA in their housing element, and then also their annual progress reports. So I think that's it. Yeah. happy to take some questions now.
Well, is there any questions or comments from the board?
I'm just curious, as far as your income statistics, where do you get that from? Is that federal agency, state agency? I guess it would be relative to what percent of a person's income they're spending on housing. I'm just wondering. Is it on your microphone? Is it off? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry about that. Had my microphone off accidentally. Yeah, just as far as the income side of your statistics, I'm wondering where do you get that data from, if you know?
Over the cost burden,
Yeah.
in particular, that's straight from the ACS, the American Community Survey census data. They have that, the households by income listed in I forget the exact table, but we could provide that table. Actually, let's see if I can be quick.
And then well, maybe Kevin's thinking about that. As far as the data used to break up the overall determination into the income categories, HCD publishes annually are the income limits, and so that data, which is using HUD data as the foundation to that, we're happy to provide a link to those income limits. But that's the foundation that we use in divvying up that overall number into those income categories that you see.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I was curious because here in Humboldt County, we're in somewhat of a unique situation in that for the last 20 years or so, probably not so much right now, we have a lot of people with under the table income here that doesn't get reported. And it was at one time it was really substantial. It seems like it would be statistically significant. And I'm just curious, that doesn't get factored into the equation. I know it'd be difficult to do something like that, but.
Yeah, we have to use data sets that are available, to us and available at a statewide level. So we have a methodology that we can apply across the state. But if you have information or, local data sources on that, that's always helpful, I think, for the Department of Finance demographers to know about. Kind of if you have that information, feel free to share it.
Yeah. I'm surprised they haven't heard about that somewhere through the grapevine.
I wouldn't be surprised if our, colleagues over the Department of Finance and demographers, do factor that into some of their projections if that's prevalent in your region. They have a good sense of lots of local trends. They also have to use the data that's available to them. But
sure.
I believe Brendan had a conversation with Walter over at Department of Finance. So there's that contact if you have questions about that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Supervisor Madrone, did you have one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Marisa, if you can come back on camera for a second. I love the view out your office window there. I'm assuming that's virtual. I don't see any houses in that view, but at any rate, just aside. So as far as the numbers, it's based off of the census that was just completed. Was it 2023 census or 24? I think it's 23, but.
Yeah, it's 2023 5-year data.
2023, yeah. My understanding is the state of California lost population. We lost some representatives, I know, at the federal level because of that. And I believe the Humboldt County may have either lost or were pretty darn flat. So I'm just curious. I mean, a lot of these numbers seem to be projecting significant population increase over, the next 10 years, 2035? And so I'm just curious at how you arrived at those projections for population increase based on the current data.
Yeah, I'll probably turn it over quickly to my colleagues. There's two things that are at play. So the majority of your determination, and Taylor and or Kevin can chime in with the exact split after I'm done making this point, but the vast majority of the determination for the Humboldt region is driven by existing pent-up demand. So that's where those adjustments that the legislature added a few years ago around cost burden and overcrowding and vacancy rates, those are indicators of pent-up housing demand for folks that already live there. And so that's, stemming from, across the state, decades of underproducing housing. So that's, and Humboldt is not unique in that regard. That's the trend for the regional housing needs determinations for most of the regions across the state. The other thing there is the regional housing needs determination is based on how many homes are estimated to be needed for both existing and projected population. And so population projections are not necessarily equivalent to household projections, and that's kind of the foundation of the regional housing needs determination, that things like household sizes are decreasing, and so while population projections may be slower than they have been in the past, there's still increasing need for housing due to aging populations and smaller household sizes, or smaller families having fewer children, or also the kind of pent up households from overcrowding situations, or things of that nature. So Kevin or Taylor, feel free to chime in with kind of that exact split, but those are some of the factors that are at play here.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, you're correct. In our determination workbook, kind of the starting point is how many households are projected at the end of your cycle, and then we subtract how many are projected at the beginning of your cycle. And that actually resulted in about a negative 200 something unit 30. Sorry, I'm trying to do some quick math. So that was in the calculation that it was, and it's not that we didn't just zero that out. It actually kind of starts you at a negative number, and then all those other factors, as Marissa said, that are addressing existing demand, they end up bringing that number up, and those are all, a lot weren't in place for your previous cycle. A lot were added. I think they were first added in the 2017 housing package, and then some were added even more recently. It was a slight dip in the household projections, but then all these other statutory factors addressing existing needs brought the number to where it was.
Oh, I appreciate all that. I don't think anybody would argue that we don't have significant housing needs. There's no doubt about that. And I guess I'm just curious. So, all of our jurisdictions, the cities, the county, are all struggling with this and trying to figure out the best way forward to be able to incentivize more housing, get more housing built. The costs of housing have gone up so substantially, many of our developers are no longer willing to step up and actually build. And there's a lot of other factors out there. But, what happens if you don't reach your RHNA numbers? What's the outcome of that? Even if you've given it your best shot, which I know everybody is. But we often fall short, right, in the past numbers. And as you said, with all these new modifiers, the numbers for RHNA have gone up substantially for our area. So what's the outcome if you don't meet those? I'm not looking to dodge it or not meet them. I'm just wondering, as a board here that deals with these things, what's the repercussions of not meeting the numbers?
So we typically track RHNA progress with what's called the annual progress report. That local jurisdictions self-report their permitting data. And assuming you all found a way to get a compliant housing element, we offer a lot of technical assistance to help on the front end. But then when you get into the actual cycle, and you're trying to meet these units with permits, what happens if you're short, and it's called the Streamlined Ministerial Approval Process. It used to be called SB 35. It's called SMAP determination. Not my favorite acronym, but it's what we got. But you get your progress would get measured at the halfway point of the cycle, and then so 4 years in, and then at the end. And if you're short, you could end up on this streamlined ministerial approval process. There are two different categories. I think one is projects that are 10% affordable would qualify for the streamlined ministerial process, and then some are 50% affordability. I'm not the expert there, but we'd be happy to connect you. But so there might be some streamlined provisions that developers might qualify for, but I don't think there are any like serious penalties. That's more on the I think on the housing element compliance side. So that, yeah, we'd be looking at the permits, and I think we like to count permits instead of completed units, because a permit kind of implies the local government did everything they could, right? They processed an application, they gave an entitlement if their jurisdiction that does entitlements, and they issued a permit. And sometimes things fall through, but yeah, we look at issued building permits in the annual progress report, and then there's SMAP, and I'll leave Marissa and Taylor if y'all know of anything else.
No, that was great, Kevin. We're happy to provide links to the SMAP resources or connect you with those staff. I will just also say that, the local governments are very much our partner in this, right? Like, you all are so critical in making this housing happen and exist. Going back to I think one of the slides Taylor shared of what RHNA is and what it's not. RHNA is a planning requirement and a planning process. And so the folks here on the call today from HCD are, we're the folks who work with all of that data and the demographers to have as close as accurate as estimate as possible of the true housing need for existing Californians and projected California households. And so we have to, start with, you can't solve the problem if you don't know how much housing you need. And so really this part of from start of the planning and estimating how much need all the way down to like that housing being created, this part of the process is really about making sure we can get as accurate of a number as possible and make sure that we have the planning requirements in place for the local governments to plan for that need.
Well, I suspect I speak for the whole board when I say thank you for being here today and giving us all the details and answering our questions and being a partner, as you said. We absolutely appreciate that. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I suspect that that's a common feeling that we have. I had thought that the streamlined ministerial permitting process had already kicked in for everything, especially ADUs and a lot of other things like that. Whereas you were saying that if you don't meet your numbers at a certain point, some of those things would kick in. I mean, am I wrong that I thought a lot of that already kicked in a big way already anyway? But at any rate, I'm taking up a lot of time with questions, so I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Is there any? Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm here in the capacity of representing our local transit authority in this meeting, but I also wanted to sort of echo some of the sentiments and add on since we have you here. And it's a rare opportunity to convey this. I'm sure this is going to come as no surprise. I'm sure other counties have voiced this concern, and I'm aware that your role in the process is that determination and allocation piece. But that said, in rural California, there are whole pretty significant swaths of our county where there's simply not the utility infrastructure to accommodate any additional units. And so I want to raise that anywhere and with anyone I can to provide that feedback to your fellow agencies. And water and wastewater are an issue, but even a greater issue is electrical capacity. So there's really significant portions of our county where that's where they're like, well, we might be able to hook up 4 more single family residences in the next year. Things that type of constraint. So I think it's worth noting that that. I know that falls on the local level to determine where the housing goes. But if I guess what I'm asking for is at every turn, if we can voice this need and ask for help in pushing for transmission, and capacity building in our region, transportation as well, because it really only makes sense to put housing in a very small number of places. And we are rich with a large, beautiful county and infrastructure poor. So I just want to say it because this is ultimately going to fall on certain jurisdictions significantly more than others. And if we can expand the capacity to house folks in places that make sense and where we can provide utilities and transportation, then of course I want us to do that. And I know this is going to be the bulk of the work is going to be on the already developed parts of our county, but we're faced with pockets where the development just simply is infeasible, and I don't know how that mapping and overlay kind of works into the process, or if it does. I suspect that really ends up falling on the local level, but I just wanted to give voice to it. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, is there any public comment on this item?
Hi, I'm Pat Kaspari, General Manager of McKinleyville Community Services District. And along Supervisor Arroyo's comments, I'm wondering if there has been any discussion at the state level for any sort of wildfire adjustment for expansion into the urban wildlands interface. And we have a lot of that, and we can't do development because CAL FIRE can't respond to a lot of the rural areas up here. Just wondering if that's been discussed at all.
Maybe Kevin, do you want to start with talking about the state of emergency kind of adjustment in the RENA process?
Yeah, sure. There are conversations for sure at the state level, and we have a state of emergency adjustment that where we consider units lost during what was the governor declared state of emergency, and those units would be brought back essentially in the next determination for that region. So there's regarding wildfire, natural disasters, water capacity, all those sorts of things. Those are definitely things we encourage you all to consider at the allocation stage. It's kind of hard at the determination level because we're dealing with sometimes multi-county regions. But once you get into the nitty-gritty of the allocation, that's certainly we saw that in other regions in the 6th cycle. Fresno County, for example, considered Williamson Act land, preservation land that was preserved. I think there was there might have been a wildfire component. They had a factor that then had like 8 other environmental factors. And as the other commentator said, the other comments about transportation, like encouraging efficient development and infill like that. And we're there to consult through that process too. But yeah, those conversations are happening. I'll pass it to Marissa. I'll end up rambling. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I'll also raise up that, so government code lists out a number of factors that can be considered in the development of your allocation methodology. This is particularly, if you want the reference, I believe it's 65584.04E. And, there's a number of factors that can be considered there. I believe, emergency evacuation route capacity, impacts of climate change are listed under there. The critical piece to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, the region allocation methodology has to further the 5 statutory objectives. That's what HCD's review of the allocation methodology is focused on, is does it pass that test? And so, as the COG, there's a lot of, this is where like the COG drives the process of putting together that allocation methodology. And there's, a number of different ways to make sure that, meeting those statutory objectives is accomplished. And there's, regional deference in how you get there, as long as you get there. And then at the housing element level, it comes down to the local governments and site selection, and local input on that, and where sites are selected within actual jurisdictions as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we had another commenter here.
Hi, Colin Fisk with CRTP. Just building on the comments about the allocation methodology, I just really wanted to emphasize that I think the whole RENA process has to be viewed in light of the other plans and processes that are happening at the same time, and most notably the regional transportation plan that you'll be discussing later in the meeting, as well as the regional climate action plan, which HCOG will likely be tasked with overseeing the implementation of. And so that allocation methodology and the housing element aspects of it that follow that for each jurisdiction are going to be critical, that those are coordinated with the goals and targets and strategies in the regional transportation plan and the regional climate action plan, so that we're putting that housing in places that doesn't result in more transportation safety issues, more greenhouse gas emissions, and all those other things that we're trying to avoid. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a few questions. I'm curious, we got a 0 adjustment for jobs housing balance, and just curious why that was not negative or positive. Does that mean we have like a perfect balance of jobs and housing? And then my second question is, now that we have this acutely low category, are we going to be counting shelter space and transitional housing in our housing elements now?
I can take the acutely low question, and then if Kevin or Taylor want to take the job profit one. So the homelessness adjustment, or the income category, is meant to, I should say, the homelessness adjustment is meant to capture long-term permanent housing needs of people experiencing homelessness. So when Taylor and Kevin were walking through the methodology, the RENA is based on, those projections are based on people who live in households, and subtract that root force. And so most people living in emergency shelters or experiencing homelessness aren't captured in that household population. And so that adjustment is to plan for not the emergency shelter stage of the housing they need, but the long-term permanent housing unit. The acutely low income category, it's not a new unit. It's basically where the EB 3093, the bill that added that category, essentially it's like dividing up what was the very low income category into very low income, extremely low income, and acutely low income. And so RENA is a planning process for permanent housing needs. And so anything that doesn't meet the definition of a housing unit will not count in the housing element or APRs for credit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can talk about the the other part, the jobs housing. So what we're looking at is we compare the number of employed residents to the number in the county to the number of people working who have jobs based in the county. And so the number of employed residents was higher than the number of jobs. So that doesn't signify what we call an inflow of commuters. And then we also don't do a negative adjustment based on jobs housing. So and the data source on that is called LEHD. You can look at it. They have a tool called On the Map, and they have cool little features. But that's what we used. It's the longitudinal employment housing something. But LEHD, that's the data source there. So there were more. It was actually folks coming into Humboldt to work, or no, sorry, going out. I got that backwards. There was more going, some going out the other way. So it wasn't an inflow. Now everyone's more confused. Sorry.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Castellano.
Hi, Leslie Castellano here, Eureka City Council, also a housing advocate. Thanks for your report. And, I think like many of the other electeds and staff folks here in the room, this is a community that has many people who have been, working to implement housing, including the City of Eureka achieving pro housing designation and, very eager to maintain that. And so I think, for us, when we see these numbers, my heart skips a few beats just in terms of, how, I think we're a community that wants to be successful in attaining these numbers. And then we see numbers that are, seem like they're just too high for us to actually attain, to be perfectly honest. And I don't mean that in a way of like shirking our responsibility. And, and especially when you look at, I've been in a lot of conversations where we're looking at, anticipating a potential decrease in population due to aging population. Of course, many of us here are also considering there could be increases due to climate refugees and things like that. I know that that's something that you're not considering so much. But, and just looking at, like the census of 2010 of having, 135,000 people and, housing 61,500 housing units versus 2024 with 132,000 people and 63,500 housing units. It just seems like the number, there's sort of a weird lurching around that it seems like, and which fair enough, but I think one of the questions I have is, in the city of Eureka, we've worked pretty closely with y'all to, implement housing. And for instance, the Link Housing Project, which I hope you're familiar with, which is on 3 scattered sites of city-owned parking lots, just over 100 units, that will have taken us over 8 years, from kind of concept to implementation to complete. And for sure, there's a lot of concern around the amount of resources available, in these highly competitive funding rounds for rural communities. So I'm just curious, when you're assigning these kinds of numbers, I hope that you're also considering how we could be successful in achieving them. And I'd be curious to understand what your methodologies are for us to achieve them, if you're going to assign them.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you were getting a slice of HCD today, and so there are many teams at HCD, including our housing element team, funding programs teams, that are all committed to working with local government developers to unlock additional housing across the state at those different stages. So, we focus on measuring the housing need. I think this is where you all, with the 7-cycle number and the changes, particularly with cost burden adjustment that happened in the 6th cycle after Humboldt's determination was issued, you're kind of getting hit with almost like 2 cycles worth of adjustments at once with this. Some of the shifting and, adapting to new numbers, as the state is better measuring existing pent-up demand than we have in the past. Some of the other regions of the states have been experiencing that more in the 6th cycle, and it's coming out. But I think all of us are familiar in whatever community you live in California with just, how acute our housing crises are and under production of housing for a decade. And so this is so that the state can plan for that housing. It doesn't do us any good to plan for half of what our actual housing need is if we want to solve the problem. On the assistance side, there are a number of funding programs, planning grants at the state, that are, happy to connect you with those teams. And the housing element team is a really great resource before they get to even the review stage of housing elements, of pointing communities towards best practices, additional programs that could be considered, and kind of talking through that. So definitely encourage reaching out to the housing element team for kind of the kickstart technical assistance conversation for the region.
All right, thank you. Is there any other public comment or board questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, just one more real quick question. Are there any negative adjustments that can be applied under the statutes? You don't have to go into detail, just yes or no would be.
Yeah, generally no.
No.
That's what I thought.
Can be negative, but not the adjustment.
All right, well, thank you all for coming out and meeting us here today. We've all had questions and things that have been in the back of our heads. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, at this time, we have another presentation on the Comprehensive Adaptation and Implementation Plan for Caltrans Climate Change Adaptation. And our
Thanks. Okay. So my name is can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Little.
My name is Lorna McFarland. I'm from Caltrans Climate Adaptation Branch. I'm here to give a brief overview of our plans for the Eureka-Arcata corridor. So this is planning in light of sea level rise. And just to let you know, this is a brief high-level overview, but I can certainly come back later with more modeling details or, specific questions. So as a reminder, and I'm sure you know because you drive it and you've seen the ongoing construction for the past couple years, but we had a group of projects called the Eureka-Arcata Corridor Improvement Projects. All of them, except for the Indianola Undercrossing, have been complete or are complete now. Indianola is still underway. And all of these projects were permitted together under one CDP, so one coastal development permit. And that's important because we got given a climate change or a sea level rise special condition, which was somewhat unique and one of the first ones given in the state. So this permit gave us two special conditions. The first was that we would commit to annual monitoring and reporting for the life of the permit. So this is monitoring of any storm events, of mean high water, things like that. And then the second was the commitment to create a comprehensive adaptation implementation plan, which is a bit of a mouthful. We did not come up with that name. And we would complete this by December 31st, 2025. I just want to note this date is a screenshot from the original permit. We are going to the Coastal Commission this October to ask for a 2-year extension. So we're looking at completing the Cape in December of 2027. So I'm going to start with special condition 1. That's the easy one. So annual monitoring and reporting has been ongoing. We submit that every year to the Coastal Commission, in which we monitor water elevation data, and this is from the North Spit tide gauge. We do an analysis of coastal hazard impacts. So are there areas of significant erosion, things like that. We also talk about adaptation hazard response. So like, were there flood events, which I've listed as well. And then of course the Cape progress. These reports are all available to you now through the northcoastclimateaction.org website, or you can reach out and I can share them all. So highlights from the annual report include the takeaways that the mean water elevations are similar across reporting years. So we haven't seen a big uptick in the mean water elevation. No flooding or coastal hazard impacts to the highway infrastructure of 101 were seen within this corridor. We're only talking about 6 miles here, but nothing was seen. The last flood event, I believe, was 2005. We didn't have to complete any unplanned repair or maintenance of dikes and berms, and no impacts that required a planned response. So we didn't have anything that said, hey, you better start working on a project right away. So there are graphs along the bottom to look at. The first one is the water elevation by month. And then, of course, the colorful one breaks it down into monitoring years. So no significant difference. Jumping to special condition 2, which is the big one, the one that we're asking for the extension on, and that's a pretty sizable lift for Caltrans. So this condition requires that we identify a suite of strategies for adapting the Eureka-Arcata corridor through at least 2100, and then complete analysis of current and future coastal hazards based on the best available science. So before I jump into it, I do want to just let you know what the CAPE is. The CAPE is a significant planning level document to address the feasibility of many sea level rise adaptation strategies that has significant expert review. What the CAPE is not is a list of program projects, and those are two very different things, and we can get into that later. So I'm happy to report we now have a whole climate branch at Caltrans. There's 4 of us, and we have made significant progress on the CAPE document. So the screenshot you see on the right is our table of contents. So you can see everything that we plan to cover in the CAPE. And we are currently at the point of incorporating results from the CAPE technical studies. So we had a large contract go to Cal Poly Humboldt and Northern Hydrology and Engineering to do some really in-depth technical studies, including coastal storm modeling, wave run-up modeling, all kinds of, there's groundwater modeling as well. And so we're pulling that information now and building that into the CAPE based on the modeling suggestions. We're also really focusing on local coordination, public outreach, cost comparisons, things like that at the moment. And then we're building out an evaluation criteria for each proposed treatment. And we plan to have the first draft of this document done this winter for internal review. Public outreach will start next year, and the document will be shared at a wider point. This table of contents has been shared with our TAC, which is our Technical Advisory Committee. And we're, of course, open to any feedback that anyone has on it. So I mentioned this contract that we have with Cal Poly Humboldt and Northern Hydrology. They've been fantastic partners, and right now we're wrapping up this in-depth analysis of current and future conditions. So we have a detailed vulnerability assessment, and the picture that you see on the right, the main takeaway is we are dividing the corridor into 6 zones. Each zone will be given a vulnerability score and the year that it is predicted to see flooding based on the various sea level rise scenarios. So the takeaway here is it's not an all or nothing scenario. We will see portions of the corridor more vulnerable before other portions, so our treatment approach needs to consider that. And then obviously one of the biggest things is, we've got to have a thoughtful adaptation plan that balances both the needs of the community, but also the environmental impact and what can and can't be permitted. So previously I mentioned that the CAPE is a large planning document with a list of suggested projects. It's not a program project. And the reason that's important, and I call it out here before I talk to you about 0M270, is 0M270 is a program project. So what our management realized was that before the CAPE is completed and we have time to find funding and program those projects in the CAPE, we need to do something for the corridor. So we have what's called 0M270. This has completed the PID phase, goes to CTC programming this coming summer, so about a year from now, and then we'll begin the project delivery cycle. This is a short-term response to an imminent threat of flooding that will be seen by the early 30s. We will be going to construction in the early 30s. So like I said, this is a separate project from the CAPE, but it used the CAPE studies to inform the design. So the scope was set in the PID stage, which is just a planning phase. The design will be finalized in the next 2 years. So this project will be completely compatible with what the Cape suggests. So if the Cape suggests a raised embankment in one place, or a viaduct in one place, or opening a culvert in one place, or restoring a historical drainage, this project will be compatible with that. So everything this project will do, the Cape can build upon. This is not just in-place adaptation. This includes steps to enhance hydraulic connectivity, including tidal influence. So we're looking at upsizing culverts, upsizing tide gates. There's a potential for reconnection of Fay Slough to 101 Slough, which is just a fancy word for the drainage ditch on the east side of the highway. And all of this was made possible from specific climate funding that we got from headquarters. The reason I can't tell you that all of the Cape projects will be programmed is because that climate funding, we don't know if we're getting more. So it'll be a community effort to find more funding. Okay, main takeaways. I know this looks like a complicated timeline. Everything on the bottom is just our monitoring, just to show you all the times we monitored and we did our reporting, which I said those reports are available and I can share them. And everything along the top is our progress on the Cape. So it's been a long ride so far. And zooming into just the top, the main takeaways here are we have a TAC meeting this October that will kind of be the most information intense of all the meetings so far. So we have modeling results to share. So we've got all of our local governments on the TAC meeting. We've got local experts. And of course, the invitation's open. If HCOG wants to send a representative, just reach out. And then our public outreach will begin next summer, so summer of 2026. External review will go agencies and then to the public will begin in the winter of 26 through the start of 27, and then we hope to have this complete by the end of 27. So short and sweet, but I'll take any questions.
Very good. And covered a lot of territory there, but you made sense in it. Is there any questions or comments from the PAC members? Seeing none right now. How about public comment on this item?
Hi, I didn't introduce myself before. I'm Kristen. I'm the Development Services Director for the City of Eureka, and I'm on the TAC. And I think it's important to understand how we got here to where we have climate funding for this segment of highway. It was because Caltrans wanted to do this interchange improvement. It triggered the need for a coastal development permit, which added this sea level rise condition, and that's how this all happened. And I'm saying that because there are other segments of highway that are super vulnerable in Humboldt County, like the segment south of Eureka, that currently aren't getting this attention. And so I just want to encourage Caltrans to grow their sea level rise perspective past this corridor segment and do this for some of our other really vulnerable segments that are critical in Humboldt County.
Thank you.
Can I respond? Okay. I'll just add that's certainly the hope, and the models that Cal Poly and Northern Hydrology and Engineering built for us can be expanded. So we'll have those models and can add data to expand to the rest of Humboldt Bay, including 255 and then South Bay. So that's on the list. It's sort of a workload issue right now, but as we get some of these things off our desk, then we can pick up new ones.
Thank you. Any other public comment or?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Is temporary closure of the highway in your toolbox for, if the flooding gets bad enough in the future, or do you have other things that would prevent that?
It's definitely something that we will mention and consider in the Cape, but it's not looked upon favorably for a variety of reasons. First and foremost is the assumption is made that, and a lot of the models show that in large storm events, if sections of 101 close that would require the closure, 255 would also experience similar influences. And so that could potentially be a large traffic volume that would have to be diverted to a non-Caltrans facility. So we prefer to keep the road open. Now, it doesn't mean there won't be traffic management solutions that go out. So maybe reductions in lanes, things like that. But the intent is to keep the highway open, as we recognize it's a main artery for the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for, like I said, a well thought out, well presented report. We appreciate it, and we will probably be calling upon you in the future.
Yeah, and like I said, if a representative of HCOG wants to join the TAC in October, you're more than welcome to.
Well, thank you for that offer. And we come now to our final presentation with the Caltrans 2025 10-year shop plan project with District 1 Asset Manager Kirsten Thurison.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity to present. As you mentioned, I'm Kirsten Thurison. I'm the District 1 Asset Manager. And yeah, I'm here to present on where we are in the 10-year shop cycle and what projects we are looking at developing in the last 5 years of the 2025 10-year plan. So that's projects that would go to construction between 2031 and 2035. So ways out, but we start planning now. I just like to have technical difficulties. Okay, thank you. So brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So overview of the 10-year plan, all our steps and where we are now in the process, the District 1 2025 performance plan, and our recent update on that. We actually just heard this month we'll be receiving at least a 16% budget cut, and with that is a cut to our performance plans, and that's because the STIP fund estimate was above 16% above last cycle, and also we have an increase in reservation projects, so our safety projects and our emergency restoration projects, and those are funded off the top of the shop. So we're looking to have to revise our list of projects. So my third item, planned projects, it's gonna be a draft list, but I will share with you once I have a final list of projects. So this is our image for the shop development plan. So at the top is the needs and inventory, and so that's every even year. So that started last year in 2024. And we're looking at all of our different assets, the inventory, what's our need, how much needs to be in good condition, the performance gaps. And then this year we received our target, so that's our district performance plan. And then we start on project nomination, which is where we are now. And we're doing our preliminary outreach. So from there, we'll go into project initiation and then cycle through the rest of the project development process. And then in 2026, we start all over again. So our next shop cycle is the 2028 shop. So to give you an idea of the timeline of development, right now we're in project nomination, and then for 2 years we'll be in the K phase. Projects will be programmed to the 0 phase in July 2028, and then the earliest anything would go to construction is July 2030, but really it's probably going to be a year from then. And we have a lot of environmentally sensitive projects, so we have a lot of projects that take an additional year, and we call those long lead. So the types of projects that are determined to be shop eligible come from the State Highway System Management Plan. So we have this shopping list of performance plan targets that come out of the State Highway System Management Plan. And so what our current draft is before the reduction for the 2025 is $1.5 billion. And we have 17 objectives. So that's for 5 years of projects across 4 counties, which is already a pretty big reduction from our last cycle, which was $1.8 billion and 23 objectives. So the reason that we had a reduction in objectives is that either all our assets went from poor to good condition, or we have projects programmed that have planned to improve those assets. So as part of the 2025 10-year plan, the projects in Humboldt County we're looking at for the last 5 years. Pavement. So I kind of just noted a nearby community to give you a rough idea where these paving limits are. So a lot of 101 between Myers Flat and Big Lagoon, or I guess even north of Big Lagoon, up to the Park Bypass, and then out on 169, the full limits there. And then we have our bike and ped infrastructure projects, which probably hear more commonly called complete streets. So these are the projects we're looking at moving forward. We still don't have a finalized list. These ones with asterisks, those are on like a railroad alignment, so we're still determining if they're SHOP eligible, but they are projects we want to move forward with. We just they won't be easy. And then for drainage, out on 96, and then we have 2 fish passage projects we're looking at developing. So the projects that I've listed here is what I call our anchor projects. So we will have like other assets on them. So for paving projects, we might also do bridge deck or striping improvements to include bike and ped infrastructure. So we have like those multi-asset projects. So there's elements that we have in the performance plan that you're not seeing here in this list. Let's see. I guess, so this, well, not this exact list, but a list was sent out to the TAC as part of a survey to comment on projects. So this is the feedback we received. We got 1 response from the Creek tribe. So their focus was on, projects out on 96. So they requested that we consult with the Creek tribe and notify them prior to commencing work on the project, and absolutely will conduct outreach and prior to the K phase initiating. So right now, this HUM 96 drainage project is slated for a future year SHOP cycle. So we'll start working on that probably another couple of years, but this project will stay on the list. It's just going to be ways out. And then also we have this Orleans bicycle and pedestrian connectivity project, and it is something we have worked on the last project initiation cycle. So we'll continue working with the tribe and look for funding opportunities on that project as well. So the survey that we put out to the TAC has closed, but we have additional or continued opportunities for, requesting information on projects. Soon to go live is this external partner project communication request form, which, and then the project book website is updated quarterly, so it has all projects. It's not just the last 5 years of the 10-year plan. And then you're always welcome to reach out to me or Megan, who's our engagement opportunities engagement coordinator in the district, and then for the projects moving into the K phase or project initiation, Nicole Farrell. So that was kind of a lot, but let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions? Yes, Supervisor Madrone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I know it's a super complicated process and a lot of big money, big projects, all that stuff. So as far as the nomination process, you said it had closed, but there was this other little opportunity. So if there were projects within the county, would that be Tom Matson that would make those nominations for the projects, our Public Works Director?
So I guess, the nomination is more that we're sharing the list of projects and saying, like, within these project limits, is there additional needs that the communities or the county is seeing? That's what we're requesting in the survey. So I guess District 1 Asset Management is like nominating the projects, and that's coming down from the headquarters, what the State Highway System Management Plan, and what, hey, you need to do this many lane miles of pavement and this many square feet of bridges.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I would assume. That, and within the cities, you've got public works directors on the TAC, and within the tribes, there's engagement there and stuff. So I imagine there's a lot more projects that are brought forward that don't make the list, right? So the list is the priorities at this point that have been determined through the process.
Correct. So for that bike and ped list, we had pulled all the community plans. Like,
right.
Okay, we know all these communities want to do projects. What's fundable by the SHOP, and what's our budget and our performance, and how, trying to prioritize all those needs. It's difficult.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. So probably one of the reasons that this project I'm going to mention didn't make the list is because when this was all being developed over the last year, it wasn't really known that this project was going to move forward, and that is the Little River Bridge, footbridge, bike bridge, and pedestrian bike connections to Crenell and Scenic Drive. It's at 30% designs right now and working with Caltrans. And in about 1 month, it's going before the Coastal Conservancy for funding for 100% designs. So within a couple of years, we're going to have that baby at 100% designs. And it is one of the biggest bottlenecks on the entire coast in regards to you either cross the highway bridges or you swim, right? I mean, there aren't a lot of places in Humboldt County where that's true. There's almost always an alternate route around the highway or stuff, but there is not there. So it's a really critical link. And you know, in 2 years, we're probably going to have all the final designs done. And so it'd be nice, given the long timeline with SHOP and everything else, to see that get on the list. But I'll talk with Tom Matson more about that. The other project is Scenic Drive. Now, I understand that's not a Caltrans facility, but it was. It used to be Highway 1. And again, I'll talk with Tom more. We're working together to, actually, there's a federal earmark that might be possible, but we'll see how that all works out. But when the county took over Highway 1 or Scenic Drive back in the late 60s, early 70s, because Highway 101 was being built and Caltrans wasn't going to take care of both, and so they gave Scenic Drive to the county. And at that time, there was a $14 million deferred maintenance on it already at that point in time. So I'll be talking with Tom and stuff, but we're hoping that maybe Caltrans might be interested in partnering on that project down the road too. So a little outside of what you're here to present, and really I need to follow up myself with Tom Matson and that. But thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none. Well, thank you very much. All right. Well, with that, we will move to the consent calendar. And we have 3 items: the meeting record from July 17th, the 2025 draft Title VI and limited Title VI program and limited English proficiency plan, and the 2025 draft public participation plan. Is there anything anybody would like to pull? Or see none. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none. Well,
Motion to approve consent calendar?
second. We have a motion and a second. It's a voice vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. Our first action item is the 2025-26 overall work program and budget amendment. And we have a staff report.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Johnson. So these next 2 items, I will try to be brief, but by all means, please ask any questions that do arise as part of the presentation of that. So our first one is our first amendment to the overall work program and budget for this fiscal year. And this is to, in essence, bring the Lolita Safe Routes to School project into the overall work program and budget for this fiscal year. So this is required, and the resolution is required in order for HCOG to accept the grant funding for the Lolita Safe Routes to School project that HCOG staff, with partnership from RCAA and County of Humboldt staff, worked on putting together. I believe it was last year. We were notified a few months ago that we were successful in obtaining that grant. We have been working internally and submitted earlier in August. Thanks to Una with HCOG for leading that and getting our conditions updated for the grant. And so this item right here is effectively just adding it to the budget as an amendment to it and as a funding augmentation with $310,000 in grant funds, as you'll see in the staff report. I will note that the 2 areas that are covering the match for the grant are coming from the county and coming from HCOG, effectively split down the middle. So you will see we have budgeted for $16,800 of staff time, which insofar as this initial budget amendment has just been done by shifting, existing budgeted funds around, some from ATP or our ATP work element, some from other sources. So We are not requesting any additional budget to meet that at this time. It's just, again, kind of playing around with the hours that we had projected for this coming year. And I'll also note, which is also noted in the staff report, we put full staff time budgeting in this coming year, although we anticipate this project having a longer timeline than that, so we don't foresee necessarily needing all those budgets, so we might end up dialing that back in future budget amendments as we go through the remainder of the fiscal year. So with that, I will hand it back to the board if there are any questions on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is the third or fourth amendment to the OWP, not this one, but going back, and they've all been because we've gotten more money. So that's a nice problem to have. But is there any questions or comments from the board? Or the PAC, I should say. Any public comment on this item? Well,
I move that the PAC recommends that the HCOG board adopt Resolution 25-21 approving the fiscal year 2025-2026 OWP and budget amendment number 1.
I'll second.
we have a motion and a second. Is this a voice vote also? Yes. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. And don't go away, Brendan. So we come now to our second PAC action item, the draft revised HCOG Transportation Development Act rules.
Yes, thank you. So this item has been a little bit in the making with HCOG staff over the last few years. So for those who are unfamiliar, the Transportation Development Act governs the funding that we receive through Caltrans for our local transportation fund, our LTF, and our STA funds that we receive. So following Caltrans's main guidance, HCOG has our own adopted subset of Transportation Development Act or TDA rules that we use to administer the funds, to perform audits, to prioritize funding, and ultimately to work with our local claimants to receive the funds that they are entitled to under the TDA. So with that, there are a number of small changes that have been encountered over the past year that staff are compelled to update at this time. There's only a couple of them, so I will list them here in a moment. A large number of these are due to just some changed circumstance in how some of the operations are happening locally, specifically in regards to transit, but then also as a result of we get audited on the Transportation Development Act funds, and there have been a number of minor audit findings to help bring us more into compliance with the TDA rules versus the practices that we've historically done for claims. So the first one is we are proposing an adjustment from April 30th to June 30th for local agencies to submit their TDA claims. This is to better align with local agency budget development, and a lot of the time in April, a lot of the budgets are in draft form as opposed to being ready to be fully claimed, as the budget development for most local agencies tends to get closer to the end of the previous fiscal year they are in. And on that note, we are proposing a change to extend the STA claim period even longer. So the STA are funds that ultimately go to HTA. They've indicated they need a little bit more time ultimately to get those claim packages together, and we have the ability to make those changes and meet all of our timelines as far as reporting. So we are proposing to make that change as well. A few other small changes, as many should be aware, HTA is taking over the dial-a-ride service, at least for this coming year, if not potentially into perpetuity. So we did modify some language within the TDA rules to make it more clear that HTA's ability to not only manage a third-party contract, but also to provide those services. We didn't go as far as to remove other potential operators from the TDA rules because we didn't necessarily want to write it so specific that it would require revision in the future should that circumstance change. But again, wanted to provide more clarity with the intent of who can ultimately operate that dial-a-ride contract. We updated some outdated language in regards to words such as poor and handicapped. Those were updated with disabled and economically disadvantaged. And lastly, we removed Blue Lake Rancheria as a transit operator because they are no longer a transit operator eligible for LTF funds. So with that, I will hand it back to the board for any questions. I guess the one last item I would like to note is this was reviewed by the SS TAC and the TAC. They had no comments outside of HTA's additional comment on extending the STA claim deadline a little bit further, which is what is being proposed as part of this item here this evening. And there is one other requirement in HCOG's TDA rules that we provide advance notice to all of our LTF claimants in writing that we are considering changes. That did go out in June, so we are well within or beyond our 30-day noticing requirements to all local agencies. So with that, I'll hand it back to the board.
Thank you. And is there any questions or comments from the PAC? Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
I'll just say on HDA's behalf, these are good changes, and thank you for bringing this forward. And I think particularly that date change, and then of course including us as a dollar ride provider, since we are anticipating doing that for the foreseeable future. So great.
Thank you. No more questions. Any public comment on this item? Well, seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll move that the PAC recommends that the board adopt the HCOG Transportation Development Act rules as revised.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. So with that, speaking of motions, we'll entertain a motion and reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. We come to a discussion item with the RTP update and discuss the plan objectives and update approach and schedule.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. So we will be launching a PowerPoint for this item, which will be coming up here shortly. So as the board is aware, and as the PAC is aware, the Regional Transportation Plan is kind of the guiding document that HCOG uses in order to help plan for transportation-related investments, projects, and planning moving forward within our region. So we are working on our next update, as we will discuss further in the slide deck here. But I would like to take a brief moment to acknowledge I will be presenting this item, but I did get a good amount of assistance from HCOG staff, including Stevie Luther and Noah Sari, who will be presenting some items on the safe and sustainable transportation targets here at the end. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank them for their effort in putting this together, and of course acknowledge Una for her continued work on RTPs of the past and of the present and future as well. So a little bit of an overview to help guide the discussion before we dive in. Again, what is the Regional Transportation Plan? It's HCOG's guiding long-range transportation planning document, very similar to a general plan for a local agency. So it really has, those lists of projects, those lists of policies, those lists of priorities that we have as a region that we want to move forward with, projects that ultimately would be eligible to receive discretionary funding through state sources primarily and through Caltrans. They're updated every 4 years. So the last time the RTP was updated was in 2022. That would be kind of the tail end, or a lot of it actually happened right in the middle of COVID. So this is our first post-COVID RTP update. And it is due to Caltrans, as we'll discuss later in the schedule, in January of 2026. So a little brief, kind of a brief couple of items here on the approach for our 2026 RTP update, and these are noted further in the staff report that was provided as well. It does need to be updated by January of 2026, so it's a pretty tight timeline that we'll be working to get this done, about 5 months at this point, in order to go from where we are today to hopeful completion in January. And given the short timeline, what we are anticipating now as on the staff level is an update that is pretty focused on just making sure that we check all the boxes, that we have our project lists updated, that we have existing conditions and other existing circumstances updated, and that we have accounted for changes since the 2022 RTP. Of course, the timeline isn't overly conducive to big structural changes to the RTP, but I will note that that was part of the 2022 RTP development. That included a lot of new items and new elements. So staff are also not anticipating the need to necessarily revisit a lot of areas in the structure of the document itself. So part of the reason to bring this here this evening as well is to take the four main items, which we'll discuss in further detail. That is the schedule, our planned public outreach component, that is our safe and sustainable transportation targets, which was kind of a performance measuring metric tool that was developed as part of the 2022 regional transportation plan, and really in our goals and objectives, and really get early board input so that if there is direction that the board wants to provide to staff at this time, that we're aware of it on the ground floor, and we can really be thinking about it as we enter into this ultimately truncated process we'll be looking at doing. So first, we'll start out with reviewing the RTP goals and objectives. So this is for our 2026 Regional Transportation Plan, but the goals and objectives that were included in the staff report, and we'll be bringing up here shortly, are all of the goals and objectives from the 2022 RTP. Just want to make sure that is clear for the PAC members. So I won't, just for the sake of time, go reading through each one of these. There are quite a few, and so I'll just be hitting the big picture items there, but by all means, as this gets into discussion, happy to freeze on any of these slides or bring any of these back up so that we can have a more detailed discussion. But we do have the overall RTP goal, which is for HCOG's goal is to have Humboldt County to have a carbon neutral multimodal transportation system that is comprehensive, safe, sustainable, and equitable, so that people in the region can travel and move goods by the modes that best suit the individual, business, industry, or society at large. And our overall RTP objective is to program all transportation funds based on multimodal transportation goals and objectives and the needs and priorities as established in the RTP. Beyond that, we have specific goals that correspond to each subsection of the RTP. That includes our tribal transportation goal, our climate crisis goal, a follow-up climate crisis goal, a goal as it pertains to our emergency transportation abilities, our land use transportation goal, complete streets, commuter trails, public transportation, aviation, and goods movement. And again, after the presentation of the item, happy to dive into any of these, or if the board members or members of the public have comments, we can discuss those in further detail at that time. There are some additional goals, I believe, in one of the early sections of the report as well. So I have these up here. I will note they are summarized because they are quite lengthy in their content. I do have them as a backup slide in their full form if the board or the PAC would like to review those and talk about them as well, but they were included in the attachment to the staff report. So that is an additional goal in the active transportation mode share and complete street section, which is overall to increase multimodal mobility, balance mode shares, and or access for users. Our economic vitality goal, which is to support the local or regional economy by improving goods movement, transportation access, efficiency, and cost effective by enhancing economic attractors. Our efficient and viable transportation system goal, which is to make the transportation system operate more efficiently, such as by increasing multimodal connectivity, increasing opportunities for short trips made via walking or biking, or to use intelligent transportation systems. Our environmental stewardship goal and climate protection, which is to enhance the performance of the transportation system while protecting and enhancing the natural environment. Our equitable and sustainable use of resource goal, which is to advocate for costs and benefits to be shared fairly and to prioritize projects on cost effectiveness as well as equity for underserved populations. And lastly, our health and safety goal, which is to increase the safety on our transportation systems, especially for our most vulnerable road users. So that is a summary of the goals and objectives. Next, I want to go over briefly our draft RTP development schedule. So this is a schedule we have put together as staff to help kind of keep us on track and to help plan for the various meetings, be it the SS TAC, the TAC, or the board, how we will produce the updates, how it will come to each one of these bodies, what the content will be, just to really kind of give you a peek into what you can expect in our board meetings as it continues coming forward all the way until January. So as you'll see here, there's a schedule that starts at August 7th. So this kicked off at our TAC meeting at August 7th, where we discussed the draft STIP fund estimate. Of course, this is also a STIP/RTIP year. So we will, in concurrence with the RTP update, be working on programming new STIP funds. And so what you'll see here, the first approximately 4 months, I believe, through the beginning of August through the end of October, a lot of our efforts at HCOG and our staff will be on the draft development, or the development of the draft RTP. So that'll be, performing the draft updates that will be presented ultimately to the SS TAC, the TAC, and the board for review and approval to release as a public review draft. I have 3 key dates called out on here for the board's information. These are discussion items that are planned to come to the board. Of course, there's one this evening where we are presenting kind of some of the ground floor level feedback we are looking for from the board. Again, at our September meeting, we anticipate bringing back a discussion item to talk about any recommendations we may receive from the SS TAC or the TAC. I will note that we are having this discussion at the board level first. It will be going to the TAC and the SS TAC, essentially the same presentation given now, to get their feedback. And if they provide any recommendations or items of note, we will bring that back for additional board discussion and or consideration at our September meeting. And then lastly, there will be probably an item in October to update the board on the progress as we continue to develop draft sections of the updates. We are planning right now, due to the abbreviated timeline, to bring one entire document for review by the board, likely at our November meeting. So I will say, be forewarned, that'll be a very large item for review, so we'll try to keep other items light as possible. In the past, when there's been more time, it's been conventional to bring subsections of the document, say 3 chapters, 2 chapters at a time for review and consideration to release as a public draft. Again, given the truncated timeline we're in now, that's likely not possible. So we are planning on having a full document in November. But it is possible that we may provide additional updates, or if some sections happen to be ready in October, we're kind of reserving that date in case we can kind of get some of this moving forward to ultimately lighten the load as we hit November. The next 2.5 months after that will be our review and adoption phase, as shown below in the green with the green arrow. So we do anticipate at our November SS TAC and TAC meetings to take our full draft RTP update document for their review and ultimately for them to provide a recommendation to the board to release the document as a public review draft. That'll come to the board at our November 20th meeting. And should the board ultimately authorize release as a public review draft at that time, that'll initiate our formal 30-day review period, which will take us through just before the Christmas holiday. And so with that would take us directly into January 15th, 2026, as shown below, which is our target to bring the RTP in its entirety back to the board for a recommendation to be adopted. And if so, at that time, we would send into Caltrans. Next, I want to touch on our draft public engagement strategy. So as you saw in the staff report, we were kind of high level with what we are anticipating at this time. We have had staff working in the meantime since that board packet was published to start building out what our public engagement strategy will be. So with that, we have some updates that we would like to share, and there will be more coming on this as we approach early September. So of course, the intent of public engagement with the RTP is really critical within the code that drives the development and the requirement of the RTP. And it's one that HCOG has traditionally been very strong with, and we aim to continue to be strong with it even in a ultimately a truncated update period. So, of course, the goal of our public input and our public outreach is not only going to be to inform the public of the regional goals, projects, and priorities that our staff level, our board level, and elected level folks are putting together and putting out there, but also to gather input on people's experiences, their interests, and their goals to help, of course, guide the goals, the policies, and the projects that are included in the RTP. As far as who and where the types of outreach opportunities we're looking at, of course, we're always looking for comments from the general public and I guess what you would call your more routine or conventional users of our transportation systems. But we're also always looking about how we can do special outreach efforts to make sure that we're targeting and getting the needs and experiences of seniors, youth, and students, low-income individuals, Spanish-speaking individuals, folks from rural communities and tribal communities, different modal users. Of course, we have a highly conventional, individual vehicle transportation-based transportation network, and we of course want to make sure we're talking to folks that don't have access to a car or a vehicle as well. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're talking to business and freight users as well, because of course, local roads and of course the state highway, one of its primary goals is to, help the economic engine that is California. So this is a synopsis of the public engagement methods that we are planning for right now, and this will lead into a kind of a draft schedule here in a moment. But we will be moving forward with developing an online and print survey in English and Spanish. We've done this in the past, so this is a survey we can circulate online, and we can send email blasts out in various places to get public participation. So it'll have a number of questions and some rating scales that we can get feedback from the public on. When that is available, we'll certainly send it out to all the board and PAC members and all of our local agencies to help get the word out, to get people responding on that. We'll be posting flyers with QR codes that'll be links to the survey. It'll also act as a little menu of our public outreach events that will be planned over the next few months. Right now, we're targeting 3 to 5 public events where HCOG will be able to table and have some materials and to be able to engage with the public as part of the RTP update process. In addition to that, currently we are targeting on setting up and holding one in-person community meeting that will be focused solely on the RTP update itself. And so that'll provide a more we'll say intimate and focused setting in order to be able to talk specifically about the RTP, where in a lot of the tabling events, you're talking about multiple items. We really want to make sure that we can drill down and have a good, meaningful workshop with the community, specifically on the RTP itself. We'll be doing our conventional email blasts and press releases, media engagement, social media, things of that nature. And lastly, we will be having HCOG staff, go around our county's various agencies and jurisdictions and other JPAs to give presentations on the update and use that as an opportunity to get further feedback directly from other local elected officials as well. So as that goes into our, this is our draft public engagement, I guess, calendar or schedule, if you will. So we're in August right now. At the beginning of September, just after the holiday weekend, we're looking to launch a lot of our early public engagement materials on the RTP. Once that goes out again, that will be followed by email blasts and a lot of ways in which we can hopefully get it further out into the community. We'll be looking at hopefully hosting at least 2 community engagement tabling events in September. Right now, some early thoughts are Arcata Friday Night Market and the North Country Fair, along with HTA as well. In October, we'll start our road show to the councils, as it were, in addition to other chambers, civic groups, or other JPAs. We'll be looking, hopefully, to host our community meeting in October, and we'll be looking for other potential community events that we could do tabling in October. In November, more of the same. We'll be looking for another opportunity for tabling. Right now, we're thinking Eureka Arts Alive would be a good opportunity for that. And then in November, should the board and all of the committees recommend and ultimately approve the release of the public review draft, that will also initiate our public review period on November 21st as noted, which will go through December 21st as the formal public comment period. So next is our safe and sustainable transportation targets, and I will be handing it over to Noah, our Civic Spark intern, who has been with HCOG approaching 1 year now. So Noah came on. The 2022 RTP, as I noted, included the safe and sustainable transportation targets, which was a new item in the RTP that was really focused on developing targets, goals, and metrics, ultimately to advance the goals of the region, specifically as it pertains to transportation investments, projects, and things of that nature. So on the tail end of adopting that RTP, there was a number of items in there that would be metrics that would be tracked, some year over year, some at couple of year intervals, ultimately to, again, measure the performance of how is the region meeting our transportation related goals. So Noah came on with the charge of going through the first iteration of going through all of this data and getting as much of that progress as he can. And I'd like to hand it over to him for a quick presentation of what he's put together. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. All right. Yes, it's on. Okay, perfect. The safe and sustainable transportation targets are the implementation and tracking portion of the RTP. And as you know, they were formed through an ad hoc committee as part of the 2022 RTP update. The purpose of the targets is to develop policy goals aimed at diminishing transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions in Humboldt County. These targets include 10 different performance measure categories, each containing a number of regional targets, the metrics of those targets, and the available data resources to track those targets. These targets encompass a broad range of categories such as Vision Zero, efficiency and practicality in locating new housing, and mode shift. So this past year, I've been serving with HCOG as a Civic Spark Fellow, collecting and analyzing data for the safe and sustainable transportation targets, among other projects. And attached as a PDF to the staff report is the baseline data collected for all the metrics in the safe and sustainable transportation targets. And these baseline data figures and tables will be further contextualized and explained in the culminating Safe and Sustainable Transportation Targets report, authored by myself and then reviewed by staff. So this is just an example of kind of the target, the metric, the baseline data, and then also I've added the data comments, and then I've further contextualized those in the report. So for a few of the targets, reliable and consistent data sources were either unavailable or too complex to measure efficiently over time. Since baseline data and future progress must be collected and tracked periodically to assess overall performance, these targets will require new data collection efforts over time. And I want to ensure that this process is most effective over the long term for staff. So one example of this is it's the target under efficiency and practicality in locating new housing. And it's specifically the connectivity scores for buildable parcels and for the jurisdictions, but this one's mainly for the unincorporated county. So during the creation of the connectivity analysis for the unincorporated Humboldt County, the cost of obtaining walk score data, which is one of the ones that tracks kind of the connectivity of this area. For each vacant parcel, it was a high cost to acquire all that data for around, it's like 2,000 plus vacant parcels in the county. And that was a roadblock to completing the analysis. However, I pivoted my strategy and developed a walk score-like metric using OpenStreetMap data that assesses walkable access to key amenities. So OpenStreetMap data is an open source mapping database that allows for mappers to add and ground truth data. And this approach actually, I think, proved more effective for evaluating connectivity, as the data is open source, it's easily accessible, and can be replicated over time to track the progress. And this approach also accounts for the fact that walk score data is often missing, incomplete, or unreliable for many unincorporated areas, which tend to have very low walk scores, or none at all in some cases, actually. And so the goal of this metric is to equip decision makers, planners, and other stakeholders with a clear understanding of which areas are best suited for permitted housing based on their connectivity scores. So as transit infrastructure and access to amenities improves over time, these scores will rise, identifying more optimal locations for future housing development. And these connectivity scores would then be calculated once more to understand the progress made in connectivity between housing and amenities and services. There's also a need to understand the areas that do not currently have great access to transit, grocery stores, and other amenities in Humboldt County. And these connectivity scores will help staff understand this better at the parcel level. It was actually kind of brought up in one of the earlier presentations about, where are you actually going to put housing to meet the goals of the RTP? And so this is really kind of a start for that for the jurisdictions to look at. So I guess I can explain it really quickly. So the kind of like the green and yellowish area is actually like the walk score overlay, but not the actual walk score numbers themselves. It's kind of a more visual representation. And what I was trying to show was the vacant parcels for the county that were in close proximity to schools, healthcare, supermarkets, bus stops, and parks. And I weighed those and then came up with these scores. And so this is just an example of data that was hard to find and that was not really reliable, but then I kind of pivoted with this one. But for others, there was more difficult data. So after speaking with staff, there's kind of an agreement that there are metrics that should be revised to streamline the data tracking process over time due to challenges in collecting said data. And these metrics and targets are outlined in this slide, as you see here. So I'll go through these. So yeah, these are the potential metric revisions that we've proposed. So I'll start at the top. So for the ZEV infrastructure performance measure, the metric concerning number of chargers per household without off-street parking was a very complex analysis that is difficult to measure over time for tracking purposes. On to the second one. So for the zero emission school buses, the target concerning public buses reaching zero emission fully by 2030, language is suggested for revision to be consistent with HEA's current fuel conversion plan, as outlined in their zero emission rollout plan. And it is suggested as well that there is a revision of the metric concerning jurisdictions' municipal fleet to be based on the percentage of zero emission vehicles for new purchases. For the efficiency and practicality in locating new housing, there should be a revision of this metric concerning estimated VMT per capita from new housing, as this data is difficult to assess fully, as many developments fall under the infill development exemption, and that exemption basically says that a VMT analysis is not required. And I found that a lot with the city of Eureka when I asked them, where are these VMT analyses? A lot of them are under that infill development exemption, so there are none. So for the active transportation education metric, we believe there should be a revision of the metric language for percentage of classrooms receiving multimodal transportation safety education. The active transportation data was actually collected from RCAA and the Department of Human and Health Services that actually routinely conduct these presentations. So we believe it's better than reaching out to the schools themselves in surveys each year with varying degrees of responses. I talked to staff, and we came up with that kind of thinking that, we might only get a few responses from each school concerning the amount of presentations that they have. So if we go and we look at, who are actually conducting these presentations, we can get a more accurate and easily trackable number. Let's see here. So as well, there's a revision to the metric language concerning the number of programs that promote and incentivize multimodal transportation. These programs were difficult to track and understand if there were still programs in place today, besides the more obvious ones such as the county's program. Our suggestion was focus on, my suggestion on this was to focus on a set number of employers and government agencies to reach out to. A baseline number to track the current programs is difficult. So I think starting from ones confirmed to be continuing today is important. And then finally, for the investing in complete streets metric, there should be a revision concerning percentage of regional discretionary funding. This number fluctuates every year, and therefore it wouldn't accurately reflect what this measure is looking to show. So yeah, with these metric revisions, it'll make it easier to track these regional targets over time. I think that's the biggest thing I was looking at through this data collection process, is how easy is it going to be for staff to, collect this data again. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Noah. So taking it back, and this is kind of our conclusion slide here, and to tie it back to the beginning of the presentation and why we're here. So what we are seeking at this time from the board as staff are any specific input, feedback, discussion, thoughts, all of the above on the goals and objectives that were, of course, kind of breezed over in the front of the presentation, but were included in full as an attachment to the staff report, the development schedule for the RTP, our planned draft strategy on public outreach, which of course is still a living, breathing thing and could change, but any specific thoughts that the board may have at this time would be helpful as we finalize at least our initial plan on public outreach. And then our safe and sustainable transportation targets. And just to provide a little bit more clarity and context to that last one as well, and I really appreciate all the work that Noah has put into this. What we have really found is it's almost been, we're approaching 4 years since the last RTP was done, and we're still working ultimately on getting reliable baseline data or completing all of some of these basic analyses or metrics that ultimately substantiate this. And I think the overarching sentiment is, I want to make it clear that it's not the suggestion we need to go in and change everything, but it's how can we take the metrics specifically and focus on the areas where the data is available, where we can do regular or routine analysis, be it at the update period for the RTP or year over year. How can we really maybe streamline or economize the types of things we're looking for to make sure that we are able to, accurately and reliably produce that tracking mechanism year over year, because it has taken a long time and a lot of effort, and we still don't have complete data for those safe and sustainable transportation targets. I will note there were a few in the table and a few discussed in the staff report, and I think it's just open for board discussion. At least this is what we want to make sure that we are hearing from the board now, if there are any feelings or thoughts on this, as opposed to later in the process, given that it is truncated. We're not necessarily talking about the targets associated in the plans themselves, but there are, I will note some, and staff will note some targets in there that are a little out of consistency with where some of our local agencies are going with their compliance. One that was called out on the slide was HTA. Of course, they're a major leader and they're doing great things in transitioning to zero emission fleet vehicles. But their transition plan, which is very aggressive and they're doing a great job on, would have them having, diesel fueled vehicles into the mid 2030s. And not meeting the RTP planned performance target of 2030 for a complete transition. So again, not necessarily to say that all these things should be revisited from the ground up. But in just some reflection in there, even some of these target areas where people are doing great work and being very aggressive, the targets that were established at that time, are not necessarily achievable or attainable. So if there is any direction or thoughts that the board would like staff to revisit, that is something that we can do and bring back some things for further consideration in the future. And to kind of put a bow on this last item here, of course, while we would more than welcome very specific feedback that the board may have, as much as anything else, we just really want to understand where the board and the PAC is on any one of these items, the safe and sustainable transportation targets, and just generally speaking, if you would like staff to investigate some of these areas, look at some of these areas in more detail, and in future board meetings, bring any of these back for more discussion. So that is all I have there. I will end by turning it back to the board if you have any questions. And again, we have multiple slides up there that has all of the safe and sustainable transportation targets and other related items. Should the board or the PAC have any questions that they would like to look over in that in more detail?
I would just say I've worked on some of those targets and metrics, and it was not an easy thing to figure out the metrics to mine the data with to see where we're at with the targets. So I think you got a good idea in not messing with the targets, but looking at how we can better grab the data we need to see where we're at. And I'm very much appreciate Noah's work on that and doing what he's done so far. So, and I know that I haven't checked lately, but as last I saw, CARB was adjusting the compliance timeline for the zero emission fleet transition. So we want to make sure we're in compliance with that. So, any other comments from the board?
Well, as one of the newer members on the COG, I don't have the depth of experience and expertise, but I certainly didn't hear anything in the proposed revised metrics that caused me any concern. And I support the idea that we have to tweak the system as we go along to make sure it's working as effectively as it can. So I'm supportive of the revisions.
Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
Thank you. I know this is a board specific item, but I have a few items to throw into the mix, and hopefully y'all will be interested in them as well. Just a couple thoughts. One was, we have had language around complete streets in here for a long time. It's really clear to me that as different jurisdictions are doing road work and maintenance, including the county, it's not always aligned with neighboring jurisdictions, or and there's not always, I think, in the urge to work within the construction window, which is quite short, there's not always a really well-developed plan about how maintenance projects incorporate complete streets principles. So things, even if it's simple things like striping of bike lanes or restriping, or possibly narrowing travel lanes just a little bit to try to achieve some speed reductions, things like that. There isn't necessarily a consistent framework for that between jurisdictions. So I would love to urge the TAC to develop complete streets model policies and basic designs that can be used regionally, that they come up with. And then rather than me as an elected official bringing to my public works director in a meeting some policy that's specific to the county only, it would be wonderful if the TAC, who are all primarily public works and transportation focused folks, help develop that. And then all of the jurisdictions adopt something that's similar. Especially, I think about like when it goes from county to city back to county in several places. where you can tell whose jurisdiction you're in because the road looks completely different, and sometimes it's great for pedestrians and bicyclists, and sometimes it's really not. And to be honest, it's a lot of times the county that has wider lanes and and kind of has this kind of maintenance framework that is often less ped and bike friendly. So I think we can be part of that. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but I would love to see that be something that the TAC helps to bring to HCOG and we help disseminate to our jurisdictions, so it's consistent. So that's really top of mind for me. And that is recognizing that all transit riders are also pedestrians. And then funding for trail maintenance and safety and transit maintenance and safety. The transit maintenance and safety continues to come up, and I mean specifically folks to assist with ensuring that stops are clean and well maintained. I know all of our jurisdictions struggle with that. HTA struggles with it, and we kind of have to figure out how to work together to make that better, but we know it's impacting ridership significantly, and it was part of our strategic planning discussion recently. The county is really struggling with trail maintenance funding, and it's so key now that we have achieved many long-term goals around trails. They're not all done by any means, but it's really important that we have that earmarked funding, and I think HCOG can help prioritize and highlight that need. Just a couple more. The climate coordinator role, I know you had a discussion recently about what that would look like to implement and track the climate action plan progress. And if HCOG is not ultimately going to be the place for that, and all of our jurisdictions are struggling to kind of figure out contributions, then I think we need to really be clear and make that call out in the RTP where that position's going to live, and maybe one of the other partners who's a really key part of the climate action plan can step up. So that's really that's something that I know that is very top of mind for me. And then lastly, you in rolling out this public engagement strategy, I know you only have till the end of the year, so maybe this is something that happens outside of your public engagement framework, but I would like to suggest a transit audit and ridership experience, both for the general public, but also for the HCOG board. I know Caltrans recently did this. They had a lot of their staff ride the bus together and talk about it and kind of describe the experience and what they gained from it. And it sounded like that was really productive. And I will say the HTA board hasn't done this. And I don't think the HCOG board has ever done this. So I think it would be really eye-opening for us to all ride the bus together and talk about it. So thank you for listening to my long list, but I was really excited to come here today and share this with you.
Well, that makes a nice segue to public comment, see? So if there's any public comment on this item.
Hello again. Colin Fisk with CRTP. First of all, just want to thank Supervisor Arroyo for those comments and share a lot of those same concerns, particularly emphasizing the need for regional complete streets policies that jurisdictions are following throughout the region right now. Arcata and Eureka have great policies, but consistent implementation and policies throughout the region would be great. That said, CRTP was pretty deeply involved in developing the current RTP 4 years ago, and we definitely support the way it turned out, and particularly those safe and sustainable transportation targets. Unfortunately, as you heard, while we have made some important progress on some of those targets, we haven't gotten anywhere near meeting them over the last 4 years. And, that's not, I think, the fault of HCOG staff, and I don't think it's the fault of having bad targets either. I think it's just an incredibly big task to meet those things. And so there's more progress to be made. And so I guess in general, we would support the idea of keeping those targets intact, keeping most of the current RTP structure intact so that we can continue to move forward and make progress towards meeting those important targets. Additionally, I think that Noah and the rest of the staff have done a pretty good job of looking at the data issues, but there are a couple of specific potential revisions that we might differ a little bit, and I just wanted to call those out. One is the vehicle miles traveled per capita from new housing, and the staff report had suggested amending that metric because of data limitations. And I just wanted to point out that the sort of CEQA analyses for each project is not the only source of applicable data for that. There are other estimates that you can use. For example, Fair and Peers, a big engineering firm, has a public data set that looks census block by census block at estimates of per capita VMT. And, it's an estimate, but I think you can use a source of data like that to more or less accurately track VMT per capita from new housing. And so I think that that's a really critical metric in terms of climate as well as safety and other environmental impacts. And so would encourage you to use those other data sources that are available and not abandon that metric. And the other one is the percentage of discretionary funding for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. I think the issue, as I understand it, is that, of course, the amount of funding that's available, the amount of overall discretionary funding that's available, of course, fluctuates from year to year. But I think you can still track the percentage of that funding that goes to bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And looking at the percentage can still tell you a lot about, holding the region accountable to its commitment to bike and pedestrian and transit infrastructure. So I would encourage you to keep that percentage goal as a target while recognizing that the total amount may change from year to year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment or board comments? Okay. This is a discussion item. There's nothing to vote on or.
Correct.
Anyway, I think you've got direction.
I do. So I appreciate that. We will move forward, and I guess the takeaways are the board is open to staff working within our staff and with our partners and with the TAC to explore some potential recommended changes specifically to metrics, but maybe a few other areas to bring forward for future consideration. And I also, of course, took down PAC member Arroyo's comments in there too, and we'll go back and look at some of those items as well to bring back as this item continues to unfold. So thank you for the discussion.
All right, and we come to our last discussion item, bike and pedestrian level of stress assessment, review and comment.
Hello, Una Smith, Senior Planner. We're excited to bring this to you today. It is part of the bigger Vibrant Neighborhoods and Multimodal Communities grant that we got a year and a half or 2 years ago, and have been working on this very extensively with CRTP, and also happy to have NOAA overlap and help us with all this data collection. So we've been sitting here a long time, and so I want to be respectful of how tired your minds might be. So the overall, what I have to present to you based on how much information you need is, one, what is level of traffic stress? And then two, what are the steps HCOG has gone through to get this product, the strengths and weaknesses of the product, and then show you quickly, just demonstrate, if you haven't had a chance to look through this online app, I'll show you what is there. So first, what is level of traffic stress? The concept is first let me talk about stress on streets and sidewalks. So there's general agreement that what leads to uncomfortable environments is space and speed and also aesthetics. So those are design factors. And basically feelings of safety, when speed goes up, feelings of safety go down and risk goes up. And space is kind of a bell curve. The less space you have, to a point, you feel unsure. But when space gets too big, that leads to speeding. So, and then there's aesthetics. What does it look like where you are walking or where you are biking or where you are driving? And we know there are feedback loops of that and then how your behavior is. For example, a very rich tree-lined street with a lot of activity, generally drivers don't speed as much. And those are places that people walk farther and they don't feel like they're walking a really long way. Whereas if it was, hot and visually unappealing, then it feels like a really long trip. And some of the geographical examples I've seen before is when people have talked about how far they have to walk. Then when the outline of the mall is put over some of the streetscapes and you find out it might be the same trip, then you kind of intuitively oh yeah, it's a really different feeling. So those are all feelings, but also design standards. The level of traffic stress is trying to capture all that with data that is actually collectible. So what we collect are the existing conditions on the streets and roads that speak to all that stuff. So how much traffic, what is the volume of cars and trucks, how much space do you have to walk on the sidewalk there? If you are in a wheelchair or have a walker, is there a curb ramp for you? So there are the kinds of things that you would, come up with yourself if you had to make a list. So LTS 1 is very low stress. So that's basically where most of the population would feel comfortable on something that was LTS 1. So maybe the inner street of the Arcata Plaza would be maybe LTS 1 if the condition of the sidewalks was perfect with ADA. LTS 2 is what my staff report took from somewhere else is it's the majority of the adult population feels comfortable in what would come out as LTS 2, as an LTS 1 was more like children based, and in LTS 2 you might lose some of that children population or wanting to take your children on a bike in the LTS 2. And then 3 is going down that way, much less people feeling comfortable. LTS 4, really quite restricted. And what we did in our draft methodology or draft results from our, it's not draft with the committees, but it's draft with you, the methodology we have used. We combined LTS 3 and 4 because even those combined, it's a minority of the population who would feel comfortable. So one of the problems, though, that in interpreting this comes up is this is a pretty technical and detailed method to get to these levels. So when 3 and 4 all look red on a map, then one of the concerns is, talking to the committees and such, is that, well, that looks like I have really unfriendly streets and such. And people maybe are getting the wrong message that, okay, these are unsafe streets. It's not true that they're unsafe, but it might be true that at the narrowest point in your sidewalk, because there is a tree well there, you don't have the minimum width of the sidewalk to get an LTS 1 or a 2. Or you have a street crossing where maybe the north-south street has painted sidewalks, crossings, but the east-west does not. So you don't get data entered as having a crosswalk. Same with if you don't have 4 ramps, you have a crossing there in the data. It's as if you have no ADA access. So those are going to show up as 3 or 4 because those would be higher stress for a lot of people. So I'm hoping that is an understandable description of what level of traffic stress concept tries to convey. So we worked with CRTP to present to all of the committees the methodology. We knew that our big constraint would be how much data we would have. We asked all the jurisdictions in the greater the greater Humboldt Bay Wiggy area, because this is where our first phase of the LTS is covering, for their traffic data. And as you can expect, there were some gaps. And then finding out what gaps there were, we then worked with the methodology to figure out assumptions. For example, okay, so for most of the residential streets, no one has the width of sidewalks. So what is a safe assumption in residential areas? That what number should we put in? So that was all discussed with the Technical Advisory Committee, and we took the best assumption in the beginning, and now we've put it through the model, and now we see how it has turned out. So we're definitely still in conversation about the strengths and weaknesses of the methodology, and where is it that the assumptions can be changed to be truer to what we think the experience of stress would be on your local roads and streets. So shall I just go ahead and go with the demo? Okay, let me first show you. This is the HCOG website page under Walk, Bike, and Roll. So this would be an introduction to people on how to get to the online application. This online application is going to be public. The way that your cities will interact with it is that all of your cities have GIS Esri subscriptions, and with that you can control your own data and update it and correct it as you need. So then you can model your own streets and use that as you will to help you with your planning, investment decisions, or just your public comment interface, or whatever you think this tool will help with. What we haven't figured out yet is, will there be a one application site where everything will be updated equally? That's a little bit trickier. So for example, if in 1 year Fortuna went and dove in and made all these changes and they got very up to date, but no other city did, then which site are we showing? If I'm making myself clear, if there were just one site with people correcting things at different rates, then we're not sure that that's what we would want, the public facing thing. So it might be that every jurisdiction would instead have their own, but then we would have to figure out how do you gray out the other areas. So right now it's a bit of a conundrum. So that is also why the page on the HCOG site, we want to be able to really alert people how to use this site, what it means. And this was some of the feedback we got from the TAC, that when all that red shows up, we want the message out there that the reason all our crossings look red is because there are not 4 corners with ADA access yet. It's not that you're going to be run over if you cross that street. So that was our attempt to do that there. Now, this is the landing page of the app. This is where it shows up when you just go, this sidebar will be open, and then it describes to you how to use this application, and it just tells you a little bit of, you can find this pullout. It leads you down to a button that looks like this, but I can't see it because of the vroom thing. And then when you go on a dot, I I usually don't have a mouse like this. Okay, there we go. So this is showing the bike and ped layer. And here is where you can turn on and off the different layers. So you can see either the crossings for pedestrian scores, or the crossings for bike scores, or the streets for each of those scores. And the one thing to note for all the users is when you have the bike picked, it overlays over the pedestrian, so you can't see the pedestrian anymore. So you would have to turn that off to be able to see just the pedestrian. And then when you go to any street and click on it, this pop-up is just its whole data table, so you can see what was entered in there. And these are the kinds of questions that are in the methodology tables for, like it says, if it's adjacent to parking, yes. And then in is the road one way? So these are all things that feed into what makes something a low stress street or a high stress street. The caret that's down here that I can't access, it will also pop up and give you the entire like Excel looking sheet of all the data. So through this app, you can see all the data that was entered, and it's pretty user friendly that you just go in there and change a number if you need to update a correction, as long as you have an Esri license to do so.
Yes.
Can I ask you something? So are the red on this particular map, are those the L3s and L4s, or are those just the bike routes?
This is the L3 and L4 bike levels of stress.
Okay.
And then...
Can you tell me where's the 101 on that? I can see it at the bottom, but like fifth and...
Here?
Okay. Thank you.
So what's a pretty popular thing to do is jump on this and like look at where your street is, right? Or for Eureka, it's like, oh, well, we have H&I. We have like the best new bike facilities in the county. And then you go there and you'll see that it's red. And then it's like super deflating. So it's like, is that wrong? Or is that when you really think about going on a bike and riding down H&I, it's a great for a bike rider, but imagine, is that a route that you would say, okay, let me and my 8-year-old ride to school? And that doesn't seem as so true, right? So it's like, yeah, that is, there's a little bit of stress in that one. So that's the way this tool, I think, is best understood. So the other part of this grant also is funding. GHD is our consultant with this, and they have a proprietary product, Place Mix, that maps destinations and activity centers. So we are going to marry those two so that we can see places where it seems like it'd be really good to have more housing, and see, are those walkable and bikeable, high stress or low stress? And vice versa, if we see a lot of green here, but there are empty lots, then, you know, the planning people might want to talk to the community about how do we start infilling there first. So this is a discussion tool that when Dan Burden comes back with Victor Dover, who's an architect, and they're both smart growth or walkable, bikeable, tree city advocates, they'll be working with at open community meetings, they'll be working to help people discuss and use this tool if people want to talk about how do you make housing and infill the way you want it in your community. So it's just a discussion item, and so if you have any questions or feedback on how does it look to you right now, or how do you feel when there's a lot of red, those were the big questions at our committee meetings.
If anybody has any, yes.
So when is Dan Burden coming? Do we know?
Just today, I learned that we have the first week of December that they will be coming out, and we have them for 3 days. So I think that the high meeting and meet days will be Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday morning before HCOG's regularly scheduled TAC meeting.
Great. And have you gotten much feedback about the red lines? Because when I look at that, I think about, you know, how I used to ride my kids around all the time, and I'm like, no. No, thank you.
Yeah, at the TAC, okay. It was concerning, and it wasn't a surprise. We also discussed when we were doing the methodology, well, you know, if we have that assumption, everything's going to look red. But at the point, we still don't know how to solve it perfectly. So, you know, it was like, okay, this is the best we have. Let's run it through. And so now we have, although the consultants have achieved their entire scope, HCOG is looking at if we do ask them to reiterate with new assumptions and remodel, then we will see if we can find funding for that and see if they have the time to do it.
What a great tool.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of data in there, and it might not be perfect right now, but I think it is a real asset.
One thing I think of, because I'm a money guy and a time guy, but I know that Eureka put a lot of time and effort and engineering and dollars into doing their H&I project. And then looking ahead, Caltrans is getting ready to do a lot of time and effort and engineering, and has even done some pop-ups, and they've completed one or two things over by Papa and Barclays that seems to be getting a lot of robust online discussion right now. And it's like, are things being improved, or what's the public perception when they look at the map and say, well, it's a death trap out here, I don't want to go? So, I mean, there's got to be a way to improve that somehow, some way.
And it is, yes, hopefully we can improve it if any of the assumptions are really just spitting out stuff that just doesn't seem right in a very objective manner. The other thing is education about what this tool is. This isn't evaluating if you have a good or bad street per se. It's not saying if it's red, it means that you had a lousy design for your bikeway. It means you've built a good bikeway that 5% of the population, I'm making that up, right? That's a really good bikeway for a certain type of rider, but it's not a universal rider, and that's okay. I mean, in some places, you would not want to make a huge investment where people really aren't going to use it even if it's top. I mean, this tool hopefully helps us with that, right? Put the best amount of money in the right places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, because we did similar on Ross Hill Road in Fortuna, and I mean, road diet, buffering, all manner of things, and it just, the appearance just doesn't, I've driven down through there, and it's a pretty well designed and easily transited thing, so it just doesn't seem to pass the perception test.
Yeah, well, that is good feedback. And if there are particular streets, let us know and we'll relook at the data. And if we see a pattern, then that will help us find which assumption, or it might even be not our assumptions. It might be straight from the methodology that has already been established and is maybe a decade old. And we're using that. And I think if there's enough local evidence to veer from that, then there would be consensus to do so.
Thank you. Yes, Supervisor Arroyo.
Thank you. I think this is really cool. I personally have already used it to think through my own bike transportation choices, and it was like an aha moment to realize, oh, there's some routes I've never tried just because they're kind of not my regular way of going that could be great options. So it's been cool to explore this tool. I will say I'm curious at the TAC if there was conversation about planning like transit stops and alignments in conjunction with some of the pedestrian level of traffic stress and crossing analysis. Was there much discussion of that?
We didn't discuss at that level, but for the next part, when the place mix gets married with this, one of the destinations is bus stops. So existing ones will be able to look at that existing condition relationship. So it definitely, we have not overlooked that.
Any other?
Mr. Chairman, it's not directly relevant, but because we're talking about bicycles to some extent here, just an observation that I couldn't avoid making is that what is called a bicycle now, the standard model is so much more like a motor vehicle than they ever have been before. And I'm talking about e-bikes, which seem to be wildly popular. And, I don't see any evidence that that's going to change. So I'm wondering if the technical people notice that, or if that's being worked into the mix somehow, because they're so much faster and quicker than a regular bicycle. That just seems like kind of a game changer to me.
Yes, definitely. What I have experienced locally is that the first discussions came up because we've benefited from new trails opening. And those are the first places where the difference in speeds started really impacting people. So it definitely has been discussed at that level, and even statewide, there are discussions about we're in a thing again where the technology has happened faster than the regulations. So a signage and all that stuff is ongoing discussions.
Any other feedback, comment? All right. Well,
I'd just like to throw out there, I commend Una and all the folks that have worked on this. It's a really big data collection and modeling effort that's been put forward. And, although, we acknowledge there's still things to look at, and as we think about how this tool will be used and how the kind of communication about the intent of the tool goes out, this is a great first step that we're very confident is going to lead into being able to, make good informed decisions in the future, to be able to be used by local jurisdictions for grant applications, or to understand, how to better improve that. So even though we've still got a little ways to go, it's shaping up to be really great, and we really appreciate our HCOG team that has worked on it in addition to our consultant team. So
it is a tool. Sometimes you have to look at how it's used and what it's used for right. Yeah. But thank you, Una. All right. We're down to staff and PAC member reports with the HCOG Executive Director's report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I will be brief, but I do have a few items I want to bring to the board and the PAC's attention. So first of all, although he is no longer here, we do have Stevie Luther, our associate planner, back from sabbatical, which we're very excited about, not just for his contributions of energy and enthusiasm in the office, but also in completing a lot of the work that we have. So we're happy to have Stevie back, and he has hit the ground running and has been doing a great job for us. I would also like to acknowledge that Noah, our Civic Spark intern, is rapidly approaching the end of his service year with HCOG, and just would like to recognize his efforts and his presence over his time here with HCOG, which are culminating in the work he's doing on the RTP safe and sustainable transportation targets like we went through earlier. So thanks to Stevie thanks to Stevie for coming back. Thanks to Noah for his efforts over the last year. And we wish him the best of luck as he moves on to the next step in his professional career. A few other updates on projects for the board. With Stevie returning, we have initiated our kickoff meetings and project work for our zero emissions fleet transition plan and our North State hydrogen fueling station siting analysis. So those projects are now underway. We did get notification today that for the carbon reduction program, so as the board may recall, we brought forward 4 projects, one from HTA, one from Blue Lake, one from Arcata, and one from Fortuna, to obligate and use the remainder of about $1 million of carbon reduction program funds. Those have all gone through the Caltrans review process, and then we got notification today that Arcata and Fortuna's have been added to the FSTIP. They have been notified that now they can start doing their funding allocation process, which will ultimately lead to reimbursable work for those 2 agencies. We hope that HTAs and Blue Lakes will be soon to follow. Of course, we had a robust discussion on RENA at the beginning of the meeting, but just to provide another update, at the end of July, the RENA working group did meet and convene, and we do have a draft number of methodology alternatives in addition to some narrative on how the RENA group and HCOG feels that the alternatives that are developed will meet the RENA objectives, which were noted by the RENA staff earlier, the HCD staff, I should say. So the board can expect to see some methods for review and consideration later at our September meeting. And as noted by HCD staff, we are actually actively working to kind of show them some of the methods that we have discussed amongst ourselves as the RENA group beforehand to make sure that we can get early input and feedback on their interpretation of our methodology before we take it to the board as much as we can. And then lastly, I want to note, and I know an email went out earlier from Amy today, the folks that are putting on the Week Without Driving, that is currently in the planning stages. I know there are some events that have happened, and there's some more leading up to the actual event itself, which I believe is late September, early October. So just wanted to provide that as an announcement to the board and to the public. An email did go out again with information on schedule and how folks can participate in the challenge. So by all means, let us know if you have any questions on that. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. And our Caltrans report.
I knew that tonight's agenda was going to be long, so I have no updates, but I do see that Jeff is online if he wants to chime in, as well as
He
Valency.
deserves to chime in. He hung out for this, yes.
Good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, I was entertained today. Usually I don't get as much entertainment when I'm on here, so it was okay. I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on Indianola, just what to expect here in the remainder of 2025. So I'm sure most of us have all driven by it recently and seen the white blocks out there. We did put a video up recently explaining what those are, but for anyone who hasn't seen that, the white strange blocks out there are to help us control the settlement of the soil adjacent to the bridge structure. So as I've come in previous meetings to talk about the concrete columns, I think approximately 7,000 of them that we've put into the ground as a ground improvement strategy to increase the bearing capacity of the soil. Those foam blocks weigh a fraction of the same amount of soil that would occupy that volume. So it allows us to reduce the risk and prevent as much settlement as would have occurred if we just used conventional soil embankment. So pretty cool technology and construction method. I believe it's the first time Caltrans has used it on a project, but is fairly widely used, I think, across the world for similar applications. So anyway, that's just about done, and contractor has gotten a lot of work done and is nearing completion on constructing the soil embankment to approach the bridge structure, and so that will continue. They already have a membrane over the polystyrene foam blocks, but they'll continue to do that and bury them with soil, and so soon you will not be able to see those. And then once we have the soil embankment and have covered the polystyrene blocks completely, we'll then begin placing base material in preparation to pave the new alignment and up and over the bridge. We are expecting traffic to drive, both northbound and southbound traffic to drive on the new bridge before the end of the year. Indianola will remain closed, both coming from the west or going westbound and then turning left going east Indianola will remain closed for the remainder of the year until next year, when we can build the new northbound or southbound on and off ramps and pave under the bridge. Indianola will remain closed. And next year, we will plan to complete construction of the project, which will also include closure of the various median openings where you can turn across the highway still today. So those will all be closed. We'll also install the half traffic signal down at Airport Road and just do some various miscellaneous drainage improvements and work that is still remaining, as well as some on-site mitigation within those median openings that we will be excavating out. So we're really nearing the end and really appreciate HCOG's partnership in this. It's been a long time coming, but we're almost there, and things are going fairly smoothly right now. So appreciate everyone's patience as we continue to build and almost complete this project. So, and I can answer any questions anyone has as well.
Anyone have questions for Jeff? It's nice to see it moving along. Nice to see a little bit of time. I got to see the stamp work and imprint work on the bridge itself, and it's going to be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. I believe Supervisor Arroyo has something.
I am going to suggest that we defer the item. This has been a more robust meeting. I do have, at a future meeting, I'll have a really beautifully produced video about our new Ride Humboldt hydrogen fueled bus and all of that. It's a little under 7 minutes. And then the Measure O spending plan that the Humboldt Transit Authority voted upon, but I want to allow that enough time. So together it's probably at least 15 minutes. And I'm not going to be here in September. So if you don't mind, let's do it in October.
I think it works for everybody.
And I will say we have had free fares for all of July. We had free fares for seniors and youth in June and still in August. And so we'll crunch the data on that, and hopefully maybe by October we'll be able to, I'll be able to also share kind of how that went and what some lessons learned were from our free fare promotion.
All right. Thank you. Any board members have anything besides my 1 minute thing? Tomorrow is the Redwood Division meeting in Fortuna of the Cal Cities League, and all city council members are invited. I believe your mayor from Blue Lake and city manager Jill Duffy are coming. And you're our incoming president, I believe, of the division. So if you have opportunity, come on down.
I'll be very late.
You can be late.
After my day job.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we will be adjourned.